Okay, so we got three things. Okay, one is purify your heart. Two is abstain from hypocrisy. Three is pray and meditate every single day. He says that that's all good, but these traits cannot be acquired by any believer unless, okay, now you got to guess. The guess. And, okay, so you think they cannot be acquired. You can purify your heart, you can abstain from hypocrisy, you can pray every day, but if you don't serve, it won't happen. Okay? Who has another guess?
Wish.
You don't wish? You don't wish. But these traits cannot be acquired by any believer unless you wish. Okay, that's possible. Maybe.
Unless you strive daily.
Unless you strive daily, you think? Who thinks that's the one? No? Okay, let's keep going then. Let's see if we can come to a conclusion. Unless you teach. It can't happen unless you teach.
Is it one word or the same?
These traits cannot be acquired by any believer unless.
So it's a sentence.
It's a random thing. You want me to read it?
English.
No, it's only one thing. Okay, I'm going to read this out to you. Okay. But these traits cannot be acquired by any believer unless he makes a daily effort to gain. Unless he makes a day. You should have got, there was this other question, it was the same answer as the previous one. Okay, next time I have a blank, just say daily, okay? But this is interesting. There's a theme that's constant in Shoghi Effendi's writings. Now, the important thing is to make a step towards one of these virtues. Make a step towards them. For example, Shoghi Effendi said, how often the beloved master was heard to say, should each one of the friends take upon himself to carry out in all its integrity and implications only one of the teachings of the faith, with devotion, detachment, constancy, and perseverance, and exemplify in all his deeds and pursuits of life, the world would become another world, and the face of the earth would mirror forth the splendors of the Alpa paradise. Did you hear what he said there? He said that Adabaha said if the friends would just take one teaching, just take one. And so tonight you can say, okay, I'm going to take whichever one you want. I'm trustworthiness, truthfulness, honesty, reliability, love, generosity, forgiveness. He says if you could just take one of them, and he says, carry it out in all its integrity, with faith, devotion, detachment, constancy, perseverance, then the whole world becomes another place. In other words, you can start small. You don't have to make this big list. You know, have you seen the Virtues Project? Anyone do that? How many virtues are there?
I don't know.
How many? 52 virtues. Okay, Adabaha says start with one. For example, you could start with truthfulness. Adabaha said truthfulness is the foundation of all virtues. If you don't have truthfulness, you can't have any other virtue. Isn't that right? If you're building a house, what's the first thing you do? You put down the house. So you can start with truthfulness if you want. But you can start with anyone according to this one. So this is a very important principle, that there is a very high standard up here. We are way down here. And we must make a daily effort to walk from here to here to here to here to here. Is that right? So all of us must begin to do that, but we must say our prayers every day and so on, and purify our hearts and so on. And we will gradually reach this element. We can also look within our lives and say, are we consistent in our Baha'i character in every arena of our lives? Are we just as reliable and trustworthy and honest in our families and in our workplaces and in our Baha'i career? In other words, are we completely consistent? If we do so, I promise you that we will stand out. We will stand out. In fact, I'm writing a book, and I created a new word, and I call it an actogram.
Huh?
An actogram is a thing that you only are allowed to say by action.
Oh.
Okay? Now, the reason I came up with this idea is that sometimes in America we play a game called charades. I don't know if you know. You play that here ever?
Yes.
And it's a game that the rule is you're not allowed to speak. and you somehow have to act out the thing. There's another game we play called Pictionary. I don't know if you play that too, in which you're also not on stage, you have to draw. So when I was thinking about that, I remember reading a hidden word of Baha'u'llah, in which he said, guidance has ever been given by words, and now it's given by deeds. Did you know that? So I thought, for every Baha'i teaching, there must be a way that you are only allowed to communicate that teaching by an act. So what is the actogram for freedom from prejudice? What's the actogram? I can't go out and say, I'm not allowed to speak it. I somehow have to do it in such a way that speaks it. Okay, what is the actogram for justice? What is the, do you understand? Now we're going to talk about this later in the class tonight, because we need to learn that every Baha'i teaching is something that has to be acted. It has to be carried out. Now I'm going to move on, and then we're going to come back to this concept of an actogram, to the second spiritual prerequisite. What is the first? We have 5 minutes? Okay, we'll just introduce it. We won't. The second one, he says, is a chaste and holy life. Chaste and holy life. But he also calls it a whole bunch of other things. And the House of Justice referred to it as purity. And the reason we do that is that Shoghi Effendi says chaste and holy, but the term chastity in the Western world has tended to mean a very narrow thing, meaning abstaining from sexual relations, particularly sexual relations outside of marriage. Whereas in the broader sense of the word, in Shoghi Effendi's concept, chastity meant purity in all of its senses. So Shoghi Effendi defined this second thing as, quote, a chaste and holy life with its implications of modesty, purity, temperance. Now temperance, what is temperance, by the way? It means not drinking alcohol. It means, so even the not drinking of alcohol. So this is a very big area. Don't think it's just not having sex outside of marriage. It's a very big area. It involves modesty, purity, temperance, not drinking alcohol, decency, clean-mindedness. Those are some of the words. And then Shoghi Effendi, an advocate of divine justice, lists, I don't know how many, 15 or 20 more examples of it. Go back and read that book, Advent Divine Justice, and you'll see. And he lists it, and he says that the standard of the world is so degenerated in this area. Would you agree? Standard of world has degenerated so much in this area that we can easily stand out if we fight against this, but it is not easy. This is one of the hard Baha'i teachings. Now the House of Justice said that we need to teach our youth, particularly this particular teaching, chastity, purity, and holiness. They say, the Guardian said it applies to youth particularly, but to everybody. But then the House of Justice said that exhortations to the youth will not work. They said they will succeed only to a limited degree in helping the youth to resist them. Rather, they said that the adults, if we want to help our youth to carry this out, have to understand that we may unintentionally and innocently be condoning the passions of the world. Okay, in other words, the world has certain passions, and we may be condoning them. What does condone mean?
Allowing.
What does condone mean? It means to tolerate, to accept, to allow, or to even to tacitly approve. Is that right?
To ignore.
I'm sorry?
To ignore.
Not so much to ignore, but to actually to accept and to go along with. That's what condone means, to go along with. And they say that we adults, if we do this, the youth are never going to follow the Baha'i laws on chastity. And then they list the six passions of the world that we condone. And I want to list these very carefully, and I'm going to ask you if you know of people in the world today that have these passions. The first passion they say we condone, they say admiration for power. Admiration for power. How many of you know people that admire power? Okay? We admire power. In our workplace, in our political environment, wherever it is, there's a certain admiration. In other words, power is something to admire. We may even bring this into our Baha'i community in the way we have elections or administer our activities and so on. The admiration for power is a passion of the world that the House of Justice says we condone. And as long as we condone that passion, it's going to be hard for us to teach our youth. That's passion number one. Passion number two, they say, is adoration of status. Adoration of status. How many of you know people that are very concerned about their status? Perhaps what job they have, what position they have, how they're viewed in the eyes of other people. Is that right? How they dress? Do you understand that? Do we have an adoration for status in today's society?
Yeah.
And do we show that to our youth and our children by us doing it? Maybe by the way. So once again, if we do that, if we show that, then we are condoning the passions of the world. We're actually swimming with the tide of the world. We need to swim against it. Admiration for power, adoration of status. When I come back after the break, I'm going to ask you to name me these 6, and you're not allowed to read from your notes. The third passion of the world, they say that we condone, and I have to admit I condone this passion too. I like this one. It says, love of luxuries. Love of luxuries. I admit, I admit, I love luxuries. How many of you love luxuries? Love luxuries. And the love of luxuries is the expression of materialism. That somehow we think that material things will bring us some kind of joy or happiness, and they don't. In fact, luxuries are the biggest fakers in the history of the human world. Because anything material that you want, you just want it, want it, want it. And you know, they've done studies where people, they want something, and until they get it, they want it more, and once they get it, its value goes down. And so there's a saying that says possession decreases value immediately. So you want something, you read the magazine, you read the brochure, then when you buy it, you bring it home, immediately it goes down in value. So, and you say, okay, well then you just transfer, now you want something else. And you just keep going and going. So the love of luxuries is the third. So number 1 is admiration of power. What's number 2?
Status.
Adoration of status. Number 3, love of luxuries. Number 4, the house says, attachment to frivolous pursuits.
Oh,
Frivolous pursuits. What does frivolous mean?
not important.
Candy Crush.
Frivolous. I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry?
It's a game, famous game.
Oh, good. Like a video game. Frivolous means things that are not really that important. Unnecessary, unimportant, trivial, and so. Okay. In the world right now, there's an attachment to frivolous pursuits. Isn't that right? And even we as, the House of This is now talking to the adults here, not to the youth, okay? But we adults also have attachment to frivolous pursuits. So whatever we spend our time, you know, in the first day, the House of Justice pointed out that Baha'u'llah said the days of your life are precious. So every minute is precious. We must realize that our time is precious and we can't attach to frivolous pursuits. Okay, how many have we got now? Admiration for power, adoration of status, love of luxuries, attachment to frivolous pursuits. There's only 2 more.
2 more.
The 5th, they said, it's glorification of violence.
Violence.
Glorification of violence. Have you noticed that there is a glorification of violence, particularly in movies and TV? That the big heroes, they use violence. Is that right? It's glorified. And a lot of video games, by the way, glorify violence, don't they? Do they play video games here in this country where they're violent?
Yes, Little India just got
I'm
it.
sorry?
Little India just got it about a few days ago.
Yes. Okay, glorification of violence. And here's the 6th one. The 6th one is the big one. Obsession with self-gratification.
Oh,
Obsession with self-gratification. In other words, self-gratification is seeking things that gratify you. Whatever that be, whether that be money, whether that be wealth, whether that be power, whether that be food, whether that be entertainment. Do you understand what I mean? We're obsessed with gratifying ourselves. We're not concerned about helping others, we're obsessed with gratifying ourselves. Now, when I first looked at this list, because you see, my family works in Hollywood. Like my uncle was a director, my other uncle was a director, my father was an actor. Everyone in my family, my cousin is a film director. I said, this is the best list you could ever print for any Hollywood filmmaker. Just put these 6 in your movie and it's bound to be a good movie. No, I'm serious. I'm going to read these again and think what a good movie it is. If it has admiration for power in the movie, if it has adoration of status, it has luxuries, it has a frivolous, it has glorification of violence, it has obsession with self-gratification. With that, that's going to make a good movie. So I realize that every time you turn your television on, every time you go to a movie theater, every time you read certain novels and stuff, you're being inundated with these passions of the world. So it's natural that you're going to catch them. Isn't that right? It's natural that you're going to be contaminated by them. I don't like to use that word. You're going to be contaminated. But the House says, they say, it must be realized that the isolation and despair from which so many suffer are products of an environment ruled by an all-pervasive materialism. In other words, they're saying, in the world today, there is isolation and despair. Would you agree? Do you know anybody that feels isolated or in despair? They say it comes from materialism, and it comes from these 6 things. So, in order for us to carry out the laws on chastity and holiness, we have to look broader into what's going on. Where is the tide of the world swimming, and where do we need to swim? We're going to take another break, or we're going to take one break, and then we're going to come back and keep talking. Thanks.